Welcome to Smithville Chamber Chatter, coming to you from historic Smithville, Texas. We're here to talk about all things Smithville, including upcoming events, updates and tips for and about local businesses, important news, election updates, and more. Brought to you by the Smithville Area Chamber of Commerce, I'm your host, April Daniels. Welcome to our podcast. Good afternoon, and welcome to the Smithville Chamber Chatter with your host, April Daniels. We're excited to be continuing our podcast series today, sponsored by the Smithville Area Chamber of Commerce, and today's sponsor, Doug's Plumbing. Our guest today is Bastrop County Sheriff Maurice Cook. We appreciate, as always, Sheriff Cook's willingness to answer questions and keep the people of Smithville informed. Good afternoon, Sheriff, and thank you for being our guest on the Smithville Chamber Chatter podcast.
Well, thank you for having me. And I'd just like to say to start with is thank you for what you do, April, and what the Chamber does. And as you know, I'm a member of the Chamber of Commerce in Smithville, and I like to say I appreciate what y'all do.
Yes, sir. Well, I appreciate those kind words. Thank you very much. Sheriff Cook, I know our listeners would like to hear from you today about your thoughts on the COVID-19 crisis and how your department has been working with communities here in Bastrop County to respond.
But you say that the listeners would like to hear about COVID-19. I think they're tired of hearing about COVID-19, but on the other hand, it's here, it's real, and it is something that we need to respond to. And the law enforcement needs and the responses from law enforcement has really stayed the same. We still have issues, law enforcement issues that we have to deal with. What we've done is we've learned to change the way we do things, and as the public has learned to change the way they do things. And so our response to the public has been always, public safety and providing for their needs as much as our needs. So.
Sure, certainly. Well, that's good to know. It's always good for our listeners to hear that some things, at least, are business as usual. That's great. Do you have any advice from a law enforcement perspective to business owners as they work to open safely in these uncertain times?
Well, of course, it would be the same, I think, that anyone would give them, and that is to follow what we've learned. The CDC guidelines, we need to follow those. We need to follow what the governor has set out and told us, this is the safe way to reopen. And, we are reopening. And so we don't want to do anything to jeopardize that. I'd like to say that I've been in Smithville recently. I've attended 3 different locations there. I've eaten several of them and even had a haircut from my favorite barbershop there. And I can tell you that the people in Smithville, the people I've been in touch with, are following those mandates and those protocols. And I'm proud of Smithville people for doing that, the merchants and so forth. And I think with an attitude like that, I don't see any problem with reopening and reestablishing their customers and so forth, which may come a little slow, but they will come back. And I look for Smithville just to bounce back. It's a wonderful place to be.
Well, thank you. And I always appreciate being able to tell our listeners that people are shopping local, and we appreciate you for shopping local here in Smithville. I'd like to take a moment to thank the sponsor of today's podcast, Doug's Plumbing. Thank you so much for always being supportive of Smithville and our community. Now, Sheriff, how do you see COVID-19 crisis impacting law enforcement priorities in Bastrop County over the next year or so?
Well, first of all, as we know, that the priorities have already been affected, and we've readjusted our priorities early on. Before we started getting into lockdowns and mandates, we anticipated, for instance, in the jail, that maybe folks would quit taking prisoners and so forth, and we are in a holding pattern now. But the feds, we were able to return about 25 prisoners to the federal government because we hold about 100 federal prisoners here. So we were able to reduce our population in the jail. So and other priorities that we're going to establish obviously is going to be set by whatever mandates come down the tube, so as to speak. When the government sets the mandates, then our priorities are going to change and we have to adjust. And so I believe our biggest challenge on priorities is simply adjusting properly where we don't curtail our obligation to the public, and our obligation obviously is public safety and making Bastrop a safer place to live, somewhere where we can safely work. And those things we're going to continue to do. And that is our highest priority, is making the public safe.
Sure. Well, thank you for that. And I know you just said a moment ago that we're all kind of a little bit weary of talking about COVID-19 and how it's affecting us today. So let's talk about something that's a little more exciting to hear from you about. I know our listeners would like to hear about any of your priorities moving forward. Fill us in on upcoming projects or updates from the sheriff's office.
Well, we have the emergency management is actually in charge of the this event. They're the ones, they're the focus point. When we have inquiries, we try to send those inquiries over to them, and we do that so that we're all on the same page. We're not giving some instructions over here that are a little outdated and so forth. So we rely heavily on the Office of Emergency Management to coordinate that and to keep us all on the same page. As we move forward with our priorities, I can tell you that we've may been a little more permissive to events, law enforcement events that have occurred around the county. And what I mean by that is our enforcement on the highways and so forth. We may have been a little bit more permissive in allowing people to get by with more stuff. But we've had 2 deaths from COVID-19 in this county, which is a tragedy, and we shouldn't have any, but we did have 2. But do you know, since Sunday, we've had 6 people killed in traffic crashes in this county. We've had 3 separate events, and we've had 6 people now. We hadn't finished out the week yet. So, our priority has to be starting to refocus on traffic event. I talked to the Highway Patrol Sergeant yesterday, and his people, as he said, are going back to full enforcement as our people are on traffic and so forth. We've got to do something to curb that. It's unacceptable to have 6 deaths in this week alone.
Well, I certainly agree with that, and I appreciate you filling us in on that, and I hope everybody is careful and safe over this holiday weekend. I know I've heard from you many times at different events and Lions Club, and times when you've come and spoken to different groups that I've been a part of, and I'm always very happy to hear from you and hear about what's going on in our law enforcement community in the whole county. I know you've always worked hard to keep your staffing in place and make sure that we are well looked after here in Bastrop County, and we certainly appreciate your hard work there, Sheriff.
Well, thank you. And I'd like to say that, that up to this point, I don't want to jinx this, but up to this point, none of our staff has come down with COVID-19. And we have been operating almost at full staffing during this whole process. We did at first allow some people to go home, and we were rotating shifts, and we were looking at different ways to keep if we did get someone infected where we would shut down our whole staff, we couldn't afford that. As we learned how to deal with this and how to prevent the spread of this disease and so forth, we've come back and now we're pretty much at full staff here at the Sheriff's Office. Our lobby is open. We are answering calls. We're doing the things that I think the public expects us to do. We're doing face-to-face calls. So.
Thank you, Sheriff. I appreciate that update. And I will say to our listeners, you heard it here. Be careful out on the road. They may have been a little permissive as we've been going through this pandemic, but buckle up and stay under the speed limit and do everything you should to be safe on our highways as you pass through Bastrop County and, of course, in all other counties as well. Sheriff, thank you today for appearing on our episode of the Smithville Chamber Chatter podcast. We invite our listeners to join us next week when our guest will be the Smithville Library Director, Judy Bergeron. Be sure to join us until then. And unless I see you before then, we'll see you on Main Street. Thanks, everybody. Thank you for listening to Smithville Chamber Chatter with your host, April Daniels. If you'd like to be a guest, email us at april.daniels@smithvilletx.org. Between now and our next episode, be sure to check out the Chamber's website at www.smithvilletx.org. Until then, we'll see you on Main Street.